In the contemporary Catholic world, there is a concerning trend of rosary misuse, raising serious alarms for the spiritual well-being of the faithful. This warning is not driven by fanaticism, but by a sincere desire to protect against spiritually dangerous practices that deceptively masquerade as religious piety. Rosaries can now be found in unexpected places, esoteric shops, mystical fairs, and even establishments that blend Catholicism with other spiritual traditions. These items often feature strange colors, dubious symbols, and are presented as charged or activated through non-Catholic practices. But how harmless are these innovations? The problem, it turns out, is very real and well documented. Diocesan exorcists report an alarming increase in people experiencing spiritual disturbances after acquiring rosaries of dubious origin. Nightmares, unexplained anxiety, and a sudden resistance to prayer are just some of the symptoms observed in such cases. But why is this happening? The spiritual origin of sacred objects is fundamentally important. This is not mere superstition, but an assertion based on the belief that the intention behind a religious object's creation, the prayers recited during its making, and the blessings received, all create a spiritual reality that extends far beyond its physical appearance. What happens then when these items are created with impure intentions or in a context alien to the Catholic faith? Unfortunately, many sincere Catholics fall into these traps not out of malice, but out of ignorance. Modern culture actively promotes religious syncretism, presenting it as something positive and encouraging people to mix Catholic practices with esoteric elements, without realizing the spiritual dangers involved. How can one recognize these dangers and protect oneself? This warning aims to educate, not condemn. The Church, as a loving mother and wise teacher, has a duty to protect her children from spiritual dangers, especially when they appear under the guise of religious piety. Indeed, correct knowledge is the key to liberation and protection from modern spiritual traps. The rosary is not merely a magical amulet or a decorative item, but a living prayer. Saint Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort called it the sweet chain that binds us to God, a definition that perfectly captures its essence, a tool for union with the divine through contemplation of the mysteries of Christ's life. Each sincerely spoken Hail Mary is an intimate conversation with the Mother of Jesus, and each mystery contemplated is a window into the life of Christ. The beads are not amulets, but guides that help maintain focus during prolonged prayer. This is the authentic function of the rosary in Catholic tradition. The rosary is a powerful spiritual weapon, as recognized by St. Pius V after the victory at Lepanto. It is a means of grace that connects the believer directly to the heart of Mary, and through her to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. When used correctly, it can transform lives and fortify the soul against temptations. But what happens when this instrument of faith is transformed into an object of superstition or a fashion accessory? The modern trivialization of the rosary represents a specific spiritual danger. In many homes, rosaries adorn walls as simple decorations. In others, they are kept in drawers as good luck charms, touched only in moments of desperation. Some people wear them as necklaces, reducing the cross of Christ to a mere fashion accessory. Is such use of the rosary harmless? Superstitious use represents another dangerous extreme. Some people believe that simply wearing a rosary without prayer provides automatic protection. Others seek special rosaries, supposedly more powerful due to their colors, materials, or exotic blessings. But isn't this a manifestation of magical thinking, alien to the Catholic spirit? The true power of the rosary lies in prayer, performed with faith and devotion. It does not matter whether the beads are made of gold or wood, or whether the crucifix is ornate or simple. What matters is the inner disposition of the one praying, the sincerity of a heart that opens itself to God's grace through Mary's maternal intercession. But how can one distinguish authentic piety from dangerous superstition? Not every color or symbol is automatically problematic. The Church has always used liturgical colors with specific meanings: white for purity, red for the blood of martyrs, green for hope. The problem arises when these colors are associated with practices alien to the Catholic faith. Saint Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort warned of the dangers of mixing Catholic piety with elements of other spiritual traditions. The French saint emphasized that true Marian devotion must be pure, untainted by superstitions or magical practices. But how is this applied in practice? Black rosaries with skulls, often sold in establishments, they'll also offer items related to black magic and occultism, raise serious questions about their spiritual origin. Red rosaries with pentagrams and multicolored rosaries sold with promises of energization and chakra activation are clear examples of dangerous syncretism. These items blend Catholic symbols with elements of incompatible spiritual traditions, creating theological confusion and opening doors to negative influences. How can one protect oneself from these dangers? An object's appearance can be deceiving, but its spiritual origin creates a reality that transcends the material. Where was it made? With what intentions? What prayers or rituals accompanied its creation? All these factors influence the spiritual nature of the object. But how does one find the answers to these questions? Documented cases show that people experience recurring nightmares and a constant feeling of spiritual oppression after acquiring rosaries of dubious origin. Only after priestly blessing and their replacement with traditional rosaries did the symptoms disappear. This is not a coincidence, but a testimony to the spiritual reality surrounding sacred objects. What should you do if you suspect you have acquired a rosary of dubious origin? In church circles, there are increasing reports of negative effects on individuals after acquiring rosaries, whose origin raises serious questions. Diocesan exorcists regularly encounter faithful suffering from spiritual disturbances provoked by seemingly harmless religious items. The symptoms vary, but most common are tormenting nightmares, unprovoked anxiety attacks, and an insurmountable aversion to prayer. As a rule, young people seeking spiritual guidance outside the traditional church fall into such situations. In search of a special spiritual experience, they acquire rosaries charged by spiritual leaders of dubious reputation or holistic therapists. Such cult objects are offered at inflated prices, and buyers are promised unprecedented protection and supernatural powers. Disturbances in one's spiritual state begin subtly. At first, the person feels a surge of confidence wearing the amulet. However, after a few days, they begin to be plagued by troubled dreams, an unexplained sense of oppression, and difficulty with prayer. Reciting the Hail Mary becomes an overwhelming task. Prayer brings not peace, but only agitation and discomfort. The procedure for liberation from negative influence is quite simple, but it requires the participation of an experienced priest. It includes a prayer of renunciation of all esoteric practices, repentance for seeking spiritual help outside the church, the destruction of the contaminated item, and its replacement with a traditional rosary consecrated according to Catholic rites. The transformation occurs almost instantly. Nightmares cease, anxiety recedes, and the person regains peace in prayer. The traditional rosary becomes a faithful companion in daily prayer, and the experience itself often leads to a profound spiritual rebirth and a return to regular religious practice. Such cases are not rare and are not limited to people with a low level of education. Catholics with university degrees, successful professionals, and even lay people actively involved in church life fall into these spiritual traps. The reason for this is a relativistic culture that asserts the equal validity of all spiritual paths. St. Augustine emphasized that the distinction between sacred objects and superstition lies in the source and purpose of trust. Catholic sacred objects serve as conduits of grace because they point to God, not to themselves. Superstition, on the contrary, places hope in the object itself, turning it into an idol. The prophet Isaiah warned, "This people approaches me with their mouth and honors me with their tongue, but their heart is far from me." External worship without internal conversion is not only useless but can also be dangerous, especially if it is linked to spiritual practices that contradict the Catholic faith. Catholic theology affirms that objects can be consecrated or defiled depending on the intentions and rituals that accompany them. A rosary consecrated during rituals invoking non-Catholic spiritual entities opens the doors to negative influences, which explains the symptoms experienced by many people. The sacramental life of the Church offers reliable protection from such traps. The sacraments, especially the Eucharist and confession, strengthen the soul and create a natural resistance to negative spiritual influences. Regular prayer and a life in a state of grace are the best defense against religious syncretism. Saint Louis Marie Grignon de Montfort identified 7 marks of true devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. It must be interior, tender, holy, constant, disinterested, pure, and humble. Any practice that does not conform to these criteria should raise doubts and, if necessary, be rejected. The Catholic mystical tradition recognizes the reality and activity of the spiritual world. Angels and demons exist and can influence human life in various ways, including through material objects. Therefore, the spiritual origin of sacred objects is of paramount importance for the spiritual safety of the faithful. There are several signs indicating improper use of the rosary. First, the place of acquisition. Rosaries acquired from esoteric shops, mystical fairs, or from people who mix Catholicism with other spiritual practices should be avoided. Genuinely Catholic rosaries should come from reliable Catholic sources. Second, the function attributed to the item. If the rosary is used exclusively as an ornament, amulet, or talisman, it loses its original purpose. A genuine rosary is a tool for contemplative prayer, not a magical artifact. It should be regularly used for meditating on the mysteries of Christ's life. Third, the spiritual sensations it evokes. A genuine Catholic rosary brings peace, spiritual comfort, and promotes growth in virtue. If, however, it causes anxiety, nightmares, aversion to prayer, or strange sensations, it may have been subjected to negative spiritual influence. The family context also matters. The proximity of a rosary to crystals, pyramids, Eastern amulets, or esoteric symbols indicates problematic religious syncretism. The Catholic faith demands doctrinal purity and is incompatible with the practices of other spiritual traditions. Faith on display is another common problem. Many families keep rosaries as decorative or inherited items, never using them for prayer. Children grow up perceiving them as simple ornaments, unaware of rosary prayer or its spiritual meaning. In the modern world, religious syncretism poses a serious threat, creating dangerous spiritual confusion. There are cases where people, unaware of deep theological contradictions, begin their day with rosary prayer and end it with tarot card reading. Such a mixture of spiritual practices not only fails to bring harmony, but also has a destructive effect on the soul, opening it to disparate and often hostile influences. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, in paragraph 21 and 11, clearly defines superstition as a distortion of religious sense and associated practices. This phenomenon can penetrate even the worship dedicated to the true God, when certain actions, perfectly legitimate or even necessary, are attributed a magical meaning. St. John Paul II, in his apostolic letter, Rosarium Virginis Mariae, 2002, emphasized that the recitation of the rosary must be permeated with Christological contemplation, with constant concentration on Jesus Christ through the mediation of Mary. The Pope strongly warned against turning this prayer into a mere mechanical repetition or a magical tool of protection. In 2003, the Vatican published the document Jesus Christ, the Bearer of the Water of Life, which contained a specific warning about the dangers associated with mixing Catholic practices with elements of modern esoteric teachings, including the practice of energizing sacred objects through non-Catholic rituals. The Congregation for Divine Worship has developed practical guidelines for purifying objects defiled by spiritual practices incompatible with Catholic doctrine. The standard procedure includes reciting a minor exorcism prayer, sprinkling with holy water, and a new blessing in accordance with Catholic rites. Saint Louis, Marie Grignon de Montfort, recognized as one of the greatest authorities in Mariology, described in detail the dangers of false devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. His treatise, True Devotion, remains an important guide for distinguishing genuine piety from superstition. It is important to emphasize that these teachings are based not on fanaticism, but on centuries of the Church's pastoral experience. Catholic saints and teachers have, for many centuries, identified spiritual patterns that recur across different eras and cultures. Religious syncretism invariably leads to spiritual confusion and opens doors to negative influences. There are 5 key questions that help assess whether one's relationship with the Rosary is spiritually healthy. First, one must ask about the origin of the Rosary. If it was acquired from an esoteric shop, a mystical fair, or from a person who mixes Catholicism with other spiritual practices, this should cause concern. Genuine Catholic rosaries should be acquired from Catholic institutions or from individuals who firmly adhere to the Catholic faith. Second, it is important to analyze how the rosary is used. If it serves only as an ornament, an amulet, or an item bringing good luck, then it has lost its original function. A genuine rosary is a tool for contemplative prayer, which should be regularly used for meditating on the mysteries of the life of Christ and the Blessed Mother. Third, one must pay attention to the spiritual effects that arise when using the rosary. A genuine Catholic rosary brings peace, spiritual comfort, and contribute to growth in virtue. If, however, it causes anxiety, nightmares, resistance to prayer, or strange sensations. It is possible that it has been subjected to negative spiritual influences. Fourth, one should pay attention to how Catholic symbols are combined with items from other spiritual traditions in the home. The proximity of rosaries to crystals, pyramids, Eastern amulets, or esoteric symbols indicates problematic religious syncretism that needs correction. Fifth, it is important to maintain a regular sacramental life. Frequent participation in the sacraments, especially the Eucharist and confession, provides natural protection from negative spiritual influences and strengthens spiritual discernment. For those who discover such problems, there is a simple path to purification. It is necessary to approach a Catholic priest, confess involvement in esoteric practices, formally renounce them, and receive guidance on purifying defiled items. This process includes replacing dubious rosaries with genuine Catholic ones, blessed in accordance with the Church's rites. God's mercy is boundless and surpasses any human error. It is never too late to change one's spiritual path. Christ does not condemn, but liberates. The Blessed Virgin Mary does not repel, but maternally embraces all her children who turn to her with a sincere heart. Many people fall into spiritual traps out of ignorance, not malice. Modern culture often presents religious syncretism as something positive and tolerant. Sincere Catholics sometimes believe they can enrich their faith by including elements from other spiritual traditions. The Church's pastoral responsibility is to patiently teach and correct with love. Priests must be ready to receive the faithful who find themselves with spiritually contaminated items or practices. The purification process should be conducted without condemnation, with pastoral wisdom. The Blessed Virgin Mary especially intercedes for those who turn to the Rosary with a sincere heart. Even when the physical object is contaminated, the pure intention of the believer seeking prayer touches Mary's maternal heart. She herself leads her children back to the safe path of genuine devotion. An examination of conscience should not plunge one into excessive scrupulosity or instill unfounded fear. Its true purpose is to foster a mature and deeply rooted spirituality that allows one to distinguish sincere devotion from blind superstition. For, as is known, truth grants freedom, and possessing correct knowledge serves as reliable protection against the spiritual traps set in the modern world. The genuine Rosary, recited with faith and sincere devotion, remains one of the most effective spiritual tools inherited from the Catholic tradition. When used correctly, it transforms hearts, strengthens family bonds, and builds the civilization of love that Christ envisioned for all humanity. True Marian devotion always points the way to Jesus and brings abundant fruits of holiness and peace.